Commander Xylo stared at the holographic projector in disbelief as the human representative calmly outlined the proposed training facility parameters. The Galactic Council had finally agreed to allow a small contingent of humans to participate in the Orion Arm Joint Defense Forces, but first, their soldiers needed to be properly acclimated to the average conditions they might face on allied worlds. And so, the Council had tasked Xylo's engineering corps with designing an appropriate training environment to prepare the human troops. But as the specs scrolled by on the display, Xylo couldn't help but think there must be some mistake. The gravity at a mere 1.1 galactic standard, a joke surely. The temperature range barely outside the optimal zone for most Kian species. Child's play. And the predators they proposed to populate the simulated ecosystem were practically domesticated compared to the ravenous beasts that roamed the untamed corners of a dozen council worlds. No, this simply wouldn't do, the commander decided. If the humans were going to fight alongside the council races, they needed to be ready for the worst the galaxy could throw at them. These pampered Earthlings clearly had no concept of what a real death world entailed. It was time to show them what it truly meant to struggle for survival in an unforgiving universe. Xylo raised a clawed appendage, and the human representative, a lanky male with close-cropped hair and piercing blue eyes, paused mid-sentence. "Will allow me to explain?" Xylo listened with growing incredulity as the human, who introduced himself as Lieutenant Volkov, launched into a detailed description of his species' homeworld. "You see," Volkov began, his eyes taking on a faraway look as he delved into the memories of his native planet. "Earth is a world of extremes. Our weather patterns alone would be considered catastrophic by most galactic standards. Take our hurricanes, for example. These massive storms can span hundreds of kilometers, with winds that reach speeds of over 250 kilometers per hour. They can level entire cities, reshape coastlines, and cause flooding on a scale that would drown whole continents on some of your worlds." The commander felt his disbelief give way to a morbid fascination as the human continued, describing the tectonic upheavals that regularly reshaped Earth's surface. "We have fault lines that run for thousands of kilometers," Volkov explained, "and when they shift, the very ground beneath our feet can heave and split, triggering earthquakes that can topple buildings and spawn tsunamis capable of devastating entire regions." But it was the lieutenant's account of Earth's native predators that truly left Xylo and his team at a loss for words. "Our apex hunters," Volkov said with a rueful grin, "are the stuff of nightmares for most species. Take the saltwater crocodile, for example. These armored behemoths can grow up to 7 meters in length and weigh over a ton. They're ambush predators, lurking beneath the surface of our rivers and estuaries, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. With jaws that can exert over 16,000 newtons of bite force, they can crush bone and tear flesh with terrifying ease." The human paused, his gaze sweeping over the stunned faces of the assembled council members. "And that's just one example," he continued. "We have bears that can stand over 3 meters tall and weigh as much as a small spacecraft. We have big cats that can run down prey at speeds of over 110 kilometers per hour. We even have venomous snakes and spiders capable of killing a full-grown human with a single bite or sting." By the time Volkov finished his account, the entire engineering team sat in stunned silence, their mandibles agape. Xylo felt a newfound sense of both respect and deep concern for these audacious pink-skinned primates. What kind of evolutionary crucible could possibly produce such resilient yet reckless creatures? And what untold chaos might they unleash upon an unsuspecting galaxy? As the shock wore off, the commander found his voice. "Lieutenant Volkov," he began, choosing his words carefully, "I must admit your description of Earth has given me pause. It seems we may have underestimated the challenges your species faces on a daily basis. However," he added, his tone growing stern, "I still believe that the training facility, as currently designed, falls short of adequately preparing your soldiers for the threats they will face in the service of the Council." Volkov nodded, his expression turning serious. "I understand your concerns, Commander, and I agree that we need to ensure our troops are ready for anything the galaxy might throw at them. But I also believe that we must be careful not to underestimate the adaptability and resilience of the human spirit. The lieutenant leaned forward, his piercing blue eyes locking with Xylo's amber orbs. You see, Commander, it's not just the physical challenges of Earth that have shaped us as a species. It's the way we've learned to confront those challenges, to bend them to our will, and forge ahead in spite of them. We have a saying on Earth, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and I believe that's the key to understanding the human psyche. Xylo felt a chill run down his spine as he considered the implications of Volkov's words. If the humans truly thrived on adversity, if they grew stronger and more determined with each obstacle they overcame, then what would happen when they were finally unleashed upon the galaxy at large? The commander shook himself, pushing the unsettling thought aside. Very well, Lieutenant, he said, his tone resolute. I will take your words under advisement, but I still believe we have a duty to provide your soldiers with the most comprehensive training possible. To that end, I propose a compromise. Volkov raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Go on. We will proceed with the construction of the training facility as planned, Xylo explained, but with a few key modifications. First, we will increase the gravity to a more challenging one. 5 galactic standard. Second, we will expand the temperature range to include more extreme highs and lows, as well as simulated weather events like your hurricanes and earthquakes. The commander paused, gauging the human's reaction. Volkov simply nodded, a glimmer of approval in his eyes. Encouraged, Xylo pressed on. Finally, we will populate the ecosystem with a more diverse array of predators, drawing from some of the most fearsome species in the Council's database. We may not be able to match the sheer lethality of Earth's native fauna, but we can certainly provide your troops with a more robust challenge. Volkov grinned, a fierce light in his eyes. I like the way you think, Commander. You've got yourself a deal. As the meeting adjourned and the human delegation took their leave, Xylo couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding mixed with a thrill of anticipation. They were about to embark on an unprecedented experiment, one that would push the boundaries of both human and council understanding. But as he watched Volkov and his team depart, their strides confident and their heads held high, the commander knew one thing with absolute certainty. The age of human ascendancy had begun, and the universe would never be the same. As the shock wore off, Commander Xylo rallied his team, and they set to work revising the training facility plans with a newfound sense of urgency and grim determination. If the humans thought a stroll through a mildly inconvenient Class 6 world constituted adequate preparation, it was their solemn duty to disabuse them of that naive notion. The galaxy was a merciless place, fraught with perils these Terrans could scarcely imagine. It fell to Xylo and his engineers to craft a crucible that would forge them into warriors truly worthy of the Council's cause. They started with the gravity, cranking it up to a punishing 2.5 galactic standard. The engineering team had initially balked at the idea, arguing that such an extreme level of gravitational stress could cause severe injury or even death to the trainees, but Xylo had been adamant. If the humans were to face the challenges of high-gravity worlds, they needed to experience the full, crushing weight of those environments firsthand. To simulate the effect, the team designed a series of massive centrifuges that would spin at varying speeds, creating a range of gravitational conditions throughout the facility. In some areas, the trainees would feel as though they were being pressed flat against the ground, their bones creaking and their muscles screaming in protest. In others, they would have to fight for every step, their movements sluggish and labored as though they were wading through a sea of molasses. Next, they dialed in a brutal temperature regime, with searing heat that would boil the very moisture from their eyes, alternating with cold so bitter it would freeze the breath in their lungs. To achieve this, the engineers created a vast network of environmental control systems, each one capable of generating extreme temperatures on demand. In the scorching hot zones, the air would shimmer with heat haze, the ground blistering to the touch. The trainees would have to navigate through shimmering mirages and choking clouds of sulfurous gas, their skin prickling with the threat of heat exhaustion or even spontaneous combustion. In the frigid cold areas, the landscape would be a frozen wasteland, with howling winds that whipped shards of ice into razor-sharp projectiles. The humans would have to fight against the numbing cold, their extremities turning blue and their breath freezing in their lungs with every desperate gasp. But Xylo knew that extreme temperatures and crushing gravity alone would not be enough to truly test the humans' mettle. They needed to face the fury of the elements themselves, to be battered and bruised by the raw power of nature unleashed. And so, the engineering team set to work designing artificial storms, earthquakes, and tsunamis at the touch of a button. The centerpiece of the system was a massive artificial storm generator, a swirling vortex of energy that could spawn Category 5 hurricanes on demand. The team programmed the generator to create storms of varying intensity and duration, each one designed to push the trainees to their absolute limits. The humans would have to navigate through blinding sheets of rain and roaring winds, dodging flying debris, and struggling to keep their footing on the slick, treacherous ground. They would have to learn to read the signs of an impending storm, to seek shelter, and brace themselves for the fury of the elements. But even the most extreme weather paled in comparison to the horrors that Xylo's team had in store for the hapless trainees. The commander had tasked his xenobiologist with scouring the Council's databases for the most fearsome predators in the known universe, creatures that would make even the hardiest warriors quail in terror, and the scientists had not disappointed. The first monstrosity they unleashed upon the training ground was the Vanchuan Death Mauler, a massive serpentine horror that had haunted the nightmares of Council soldiers for generations. The beast was a perfect killing machine, its sinuous body covered in overlapping plates of near-impenetrable armor, its 6 scythe-like claws capable of shearing through reinforced steel with ease, its gaping maw lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, each one as long as a human arm and dripping with corrosive venom. When the Death Mauler first burst from the underbrush, its armored hide glistening in the harsh artificial light, the human trainees had scattered in terror, their weapons seemingly useless against the creature's impenetrable hide. But then, in a display of courage and quick thinking that left Xylo both impressed and deeply concerned, one of the Terrans had jumped into action. Private Irina Mikova, a wiry woman with close-cropped hair and a fierce determination in her eyes, had boldly leapt onto the Death Mauler's back, clambering up its armored plates with a strength and agility that defied belief. As the beast thrashed and roared beneath her, Mikova had managed to jam a plasma grenade into the gap between 2 of its armor plates, right at the base of its skull. The resulting explosion had been deafening, a blinding flash of light and heat that had sent the other trainees scrambling for cover. But when the smoke cleared, the Death Mauler lay dead, its head a smoking ruin, and Private Mikova stood triumphant atop its carcass, her face streaked with soot and her eyes blazing with adrenaline-fueled exhilaration. And then there was the incident with the Noxian Mind Ripper swarm. The insectoid horrors were the stuff of nightmares, their chitinous bodies pulsing with a sickly bioluminescence, their multifaceted eyes glittering with a malevolent intelligence. But it was their ability to project a psychic aura of pure, mind-shattering terror that made them truly fearsome. When the swarm descended upon the training ground, their buzzing wings filling the air with a deafening drone, Xylo had been certain that the humans would break. After all, the Mind Ripper's psychic assault had been known to incapacitate even the most battle-hardened Council warriors, leaving them gibbering and helpless before the ravenous horde. But to the commander's utter astonishment, the humans had not only resisted the Mind Ripper's psychic onslaught, but had charged headlong into the swarm, whooping and hollering like possessed berserkers. They had met the insectoid horrors with flame and steel, their eyes wild with a frightening blend of terror and exhilaration. Leading the charge had been Sergeant Tomas Rees, a giant of a man with a voice like a rumbling avalanche. Rees had plunged into the thick of the swarm, his plasma rifle blazing, his face split in a feral grin. The sergeant had seemed to revel in the chaos and carnage, his booming laughter echoing across the battlefield as he mowed down the Mind Rippers with ruthless efficiency. In the end, it was the insects who broke, not the humans. The swarm had retreated, their psychic assault faltering in the face of the Terran's indomitable will, and as the last of the Mind Rippers fell, its carapace sizzling under the heat of Rees's plasma fire, The sergeant had thrust his fist into the air in a gesture of defiant triumph, his voice ringing out across the blood-soaked training ground. "Is that all you've got?" he bellowed, his eyes flashing with a wild, almost feral light. "Come on, you bastards. Humanity's just getting warmed up." And Xylo, watching from the safety of the control room, could only shake his head in disbelief, a chill running down his spine at the sheer audacity of these impossible creatures. But it was the hellscape scenario that truly defied belief. As the trainees stumbled through the ever-shifting nightmare realm, beset by physics-defying anomalies and gibbering horrors, Xylo watched in growing awe as the humans not only persevered but seemed to thrive in the chaos. They adapted to the fluctuating gravity with preternatural speed, using the sudden shifts to launch themselves at their foes or escape certain doom. They jury-rigged their equipment to harness the crackling energies that suffused the air, turning the twisted landscape's own hazards against the monstrosities that stalked them. The hellscape had been designed as the ultimate test of the trainees' physical and mental resilience, a nightmarish gauntlet that would push them to the very brink of sanity and beyond. Every aspect of the environment had been carefully crafted to defy explanation, to shatter the fragile illusion of reality, and plunge the hapless souls who dared to venture within into a realm of pure, unbridled madness. The ground beneath the trainees' feet was a roiling sea of chaos, its surface shifting and buckling with each passing moment. One instant, the terrain would be a craggy expanse of jagged obsidian, the razor-sharp edges tearing at the humans' boots and slicing through their protective gear as if it were tissue paper. The next, it would become a sucking quagmire of viscous, tar-like sludge, dragging the trainees down into its foul depths with a strength that defied all reason. And through it all, the very laws of physics seemed to unravel, the fundamental forces that governed the universe twisting and distorting in ways that defied all logical explanation. Gravity would fluctuate wildly, one moment crushing the humans to the ground with a force that threatened to pulverize their bones, the next flinging them high into the air like ragdolls tossed on the winds of a hurricane. Strange energies crackled through the air, dancing along the human's skin with a searing, agonizing intensity. Bolts of sickly green lightning arced from the roiling clouds above, leaving sizzling craters in the tortured earth and sending the trainees scrambling for cover. Eldritch flames of impossible colors flickered and danced on the horizon, casting eerie shadows that seemed to writhe with a malevolent intelligence all their own. And through it all, the trainees had to contend with the denizens of this hellish realm, the nightmarish abominations that stalked the twisted landscape with a hunger that could never be sated. These were creatures that defied all taxonomy, monstrosities that seemed to have been spawned from the fevered imaginings of a madman's darkest dreams. There were things that looked like they might once have been human, their bodies warped and twisted by the unholy energies that suffused the hellscape. They shambled through the blasted ruins of the training ground, their mouths gaping in silent screams, their eyes filled with a pain and longing that was almost too much to bear. There were other horrors that defied all description, creatures that seemed to be spun from the very fabric of nightmares themselves. They slithered and crawled and oozed through the shadows, their forms shifting and changing with each passing moment. Some were masses of writhing tentacles and gnashing teeth. Others were amorphous blobs of pulsating, cancerous flesh. And still others were things that the mind refused to acknowledge, horrors that existed beyond the ken of mortal understanding. And yet, through it all, the humans persevered. They met the horrors of the hellscape with a ferocity and tenacity that left Xylo breathless with a mixture of awe and dread. They fought with a savagery that was almost primal, their eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to burn with the intensity of 1,000 suns. Lance Corporal Natalia Ananova had been the first to discover that the anomalous energies crackling through the hellscape could be harnessed, turned back against the nightmares that haunted its blasted landscape. The young woman had always had a knack for technology, an almost intuitive grasp of machines and electronics that had set her apart from her fellow trainees. And so, when she found herself cornered by a trio of shambling horrors, their bodies pulsing with the same sickly green energy that arced through the air around her, Ivanova had acted on instinct. She had torn open the casing of her plasma rifle, her fingers flying over the exposed circuitry with a desperate, feverish intensity. And then, with a triumphant cry, she had unleashed a blazing torrent of eldritch fire, the rifle's power cell overloading with a scream of tortured metal. The horrors had been vaporized in an instant, their twisted forms consumed by the ravenous flames. And as the smoke cleared, Ivanova had stood tall, her face streaked with grime and her eyes blazing with a fierce, unyielding determination. From that moment on, the humans had begun to turn the tables on their nightmarish foes. They had scavenged components from their shattered equipment, jury-rigging weapons and tools that pulsed with the same unholy energies that permeated the hellscape. They had learned to channel the chaotic fluctuations of gravity, using the sudden shifts to launch themselves at their enemies or to escape the clutches of the hungry earth. Private Kenji Sakamoto had been the first to master this new way of moving, his lithe form twisting and contorting in midair with a grace that seemed almost superhuman. The young man had always been an acrobat of sorts, his agility and balance honed by years of practicing parkour and free running in the sprawling urban jungles of his homeworld. And now, in the nightmare realm of the hellscape, Sakamoto's skills had found their ultimate expression. He bounded and leaped through the twisted ruins, his body flowing like quicksilver, as he dodged the grasping claws and snapping jaws of the horrors that haunted the landscape. He ran along walls and ceilings, his feet finding purchase on surfaces that seemed to defy all laws of physics, and he struck with a speed and precision that left his foes reeling, his blows landing with a force that seemed to shatter bone and pulverize flesh. Through it all, the trainees had been hounded by the malevolent presence that lurked at the heart of this hellscape, the unseen force that seemed to guide and direct the nightmares that stalked its twisted landscape. It was a presence that defied all explanation, a force of pure, unfettered chaos that seemed to exist beyond the boundaries of mortal comprehension. And yet, when the entity finally revealed itself, the humans faced it without fear. It had come to them as a writhing mass of shadow and smoke, a vast, amorphous horror that seemed to fill the entire sky. Its form was shot through with pulsing veins of sickly green light, its surface roiling and seething like the surface of some vast, infernal sea. And at its center, there had been a gaping maw filled with row upon row of jagged, knife-like teeth, a mouth that seemed to stretch on into infinity. From that impossible gullet had come a sound that Xylo knew would haunt his dreams for the rest of his days. A bone-chilling wail of hunger and fury that seemed to shake the very foundations of the universe. But the humans had not quailed before that awful cry. They had not fallen to their knees in gibbering terror or fled in mindless panic. Instead, they had stood their ground, their eyes blazing with a fierce, unyielding determination. Sergeant Rees had been the first to charge, a wordless battle cry tearing from his throat as he rushed headlong towards the nightmare made manifest. His plasma rifle had flared with a brilliant, blinding intensity, the searing bolts of energy ripping through the entity's shadowy form with a staccato rhythm of thunderous detonations. And behind him had come the rest of the trainees, their faces grim and their weapons blazing. They had poured everything they had into the fight, every ounce of skill and courage and sheer, stubborn determination. They had hurled taunts and challenges at the entity, their voices ringing out with a fierce, defiant clarity over the howling winds of the hellscape. In the end, it had been Makova who had struck the final blow. The young woman had clambered up the entity's writhing form, her fingers finding purchase in its slick, oily flesh, and with a final triumphant cry, she had plunged her combat knife into the very center of its being, the blade sinking to the hilt in a gout of viscous black ichor. The entity had shuddered and convulsed, its form dissolving into a swirling vortex of shadow and flame, and as it dissipated, the trainees had stood tall amidst the ruins of the hellscape, their faces streaked with grime and blood, their eyes blazing with the light of victory. As the last of the trainees emerged from the gauntlet, battered but triumphant, Commander Xylo found himself grappling with a newfound sense of both admiration and trepidation. These humans were not merely survivors, but something else entirely. A species forged in the crucible of a world so harsh, so unforgiving that it had bred true warriors, beings who thrived in the face of adversity and chaos. And now, as the Council prepared to welcome these indomitable Terrans into the ranks of the Orion Armed Joint Defense Force, Xylo couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the precipice of a new era, one in which the balance of power across the galaxy would be forever altered. The age of human ascendancy had indeed begun, and as he watched the celebration unfold, the commander found himself both exhilarated and terrified by the prospect of what lay ahead. One thing was certain: the universe would never be the same.